With all of the new content that's being released surrounding the next edition of Dungeons & Dragons, you or someone you know may be interested in starting a campaign. The good news is, with all of the changes they're making, there's really no better time to get into it. They're changing subclasses, reworking spells, and making quality of life improvements that are sure to make the game an improved version of its previous self. But before you get there, you might want some insight in what it means to actually start a campaign. And that's what this video talks about, one of the most important parts of any campaign: Session 0. You might have heard the term session tossed around when talking about D&D. This could be session 1, 2, 3, session 100. Hey DM, great session, that was awesome. Thanks guys, you're too much. And you may not know what it means. If you do, that's great. If you don't, then this video is for you. A session refers to any time of playing. You could meet for an hour, 4 hours, 10 hours, but you've only met for one session. And new campaigns typically start at session 1. But if your DM knows what they're doing and they really want to take the time to get to know you as a player and your character, then they'll start at session 0. Now, this video applies to basically any tabletop role-playing game, but I'm going to use D&D as it's the most influential in my life. If you've looked into starting a campaign and creating a D&D character, then you know that there are a million things to choose from race to class to subclass to stat points to feats. All of that can be kind of overwhelming, so Session 0 really is a place to come together and talk about all of those options. Jumping in blind to a campaign without talking all of that stuff can lead to frustration and ennui in a campaign that is going to take a lot of time. So Session 0 is going to allow you to do a few things, and the first is going to be set expectations. You and your players, or you and your DM, can sit around and talk about what you expect of the campaign. It also gives a chance for the DM to lay the groundwork of what type of campaign this is going to be. Is it a horror campaign? Is it a high fantasy campaign? Is it a low fantasy campaign? Is magic something that is wildly used all over, or is it something that only a few people practice in secret? That theme is going to come with different content, and your DM may expect certain content from you, including, your character's backstory or what their adventuring reasons are. Session 0 allows for both the DM and the players to set expectations as what's expected of each other and what they expect from the campaign. Maybe players want a hack and slash full style combat campaign where they're constantly running into encounters. Or maybe they want a heavy roleplay setting where it's a lot about political intrigue and maybe trade, where players can control import and export of certain goods.
Dragons do not do well in captivity.
How do you know this?
That's what I do. I drink and I know things.
If you're aiming for a dark and gritty campaign and you're met with Boblin the Goblin who's up for lighthearted hijinks, those characters may not mesh well together and can throw off either person's expectations of what's to come. If you set these expectations now, you're going to avoid any conflict in the future, and you're going to be able to get the most out of all this time you're spent playing D&D. At the end of the day, it's a game and everybody wants to have fun and everybody wants to get something out of it. You're also going to be able to talk about the hardest thing in any D&D group: scheduling. Dungeons & Dragons is a time commitment and a half, and you're going to want to make sure that you figure out conflicts, scheduling, cadence of sessions, all of these things in Session 0 so that you can actually meet to play the game. I'm not saying you have to miss your child's first birth for a D&D party, but, I would consider it at least. You've set expectations, you know what each party wants from their campaign. Now it's time to actually create a character. You can handle some of this before, absolutely, but Session 0 is going to be that time where you can meld characters together and sort of bounce ideas off one another to see what you actually want to play and who you want to play. Session 0 is an awesome opportunity for new and experienced players to come together and talk about some of the things they want to try and do. Do you want to be a martial class that's constantly up in the fight with swords and battle axes and things of that nature? Or do you want to be a spellcaster that hides behind the front line and blast people with spells? This is going to allow you to talk about party cohesion, making sure that, if you want to play a rogue or a sorcerer, then you have somebody who's able to heal you so that you don't go down right away. And if you're the person who chooses cleric for this, God bless you. Take a point of inspiration. But that being said, if there are no healers in your party, then maybe that's a chance for your DM to understand, okay, every time my players are in a town or in a village of some sort, they should probably be able to buy healing potions so that they don't die. This also allows for people to come up with cohesive backstories. Maybe your siblings or childhood friends, or, you want to figure out who your moms and dads are. You should probably talk about this in session 0 instead of just dropping it on another player. You're also going to be able to understand each other's moral compass if somebody's playing the edgy rogue who's not afraid to, take someone out, and the cleric is like, hey, I don't really vibe with that. That creates good role play, and you two are going to be able to discuss those things as they come up in play. All that being said, session 0 is a chance for you to make your character interesting because, you get out of it what you put in, and you want to have a character that feels fleshed out and isn't just some guy.
I can see!
I can fight!
That brings us to our next point, and that's character outcome, or I guess you could call it end goal. Now that you've created a character, you should probably have an idea, some semblance in your mind of what the end game for this character is. To give you an example, let's say your character has an affinity for dragons, right? They were a young child who was fascinated by the mystic beasts that are talked about but seldom seen. If your character then goes through 20 levels without seeing a dragon, you can imagine that Draco Dragon Searcher is upset that he never actually got to see a dragon. But if your DM explained in expectations that, hey, dragons are extinct, they've been wiped out, then Draco can change his mind about some of the things he's looking for. But given it's D&D and dragons is in the name, if dragons are in your campaign, well, maybe there's a chance to sprinkle scales or like a dragon tooth, little bits and pieces through the story that allow Draco Dragon Searcher to actually feel like he's working towards something, his end goal of seeing a dragon or fighting a dragon, whatever that may be. Ultimately, it's going to keep you as a player intrigued and also give your DM sort of a backdoor story piece. That's kind of the flavorful things that you'll talk about in session 0, right? Setting expectations, your character, and then kind of what you want out of the campaign from both your individual perspective and your character's perspective. Other things you will probably need to talk about are the actual game mechanics. Everybody in D&D should probably know how to play, so session 0 is a really good chance for you to talk about some of the rules of D&D. You're going to want to talk about combat rules and attacking and initiative and order of turns and spell casting and all of those wonderful things that actually go into the mechanics that exist in 1,000+ pages of books. And you're going to want to talk about your skill checks and what they each mean. And your player by the end of a campaign should know exactly what they're looking for and how to roll the appropriate skill check. Once you've talked about those mechanics, then you could talk a little bit about house rules, right? Maybe, for example, your potions can be administered to yourself as a bonus action in your action economy. Every dungeon master has a little something different that they'd like to do with their game, and in this case, you're going to want to talk about what those things are. They're known as house rules. They can include things like critical hits or critical failures, or maybe you want to talk about what it means to take a long rest. Is a long rest, 8 hours, a night's sleep, or is it a week after you got beat up by a lich or something like that? And then, of course, there is always the reality that your character may die. So, of course, you want to talk about what it means to have a character die. Some people are, hey, that's it, roll a new character. Or, you have sort of ins and outs of a campaign where a character dies, but like comic books, they're never really dead. There's other variant rules and optional systems inside the game. You could talk about flanking and realism and how realistic do criticals, go. All of that stuff should be discussed in session 0 because you don't want to get to session 40 and somebody critically fails and loses a leg and mechanically suffers from losing their leg. And you're like, wait a minute, we just played 45 sessions of me having 2 legs, and that would obviously be a problem. And then finally, one important thing that you're going to want to talk about inside session 0 is safety. What are some topics that people are not comfortable with? You can put in a system, the X and O system. If somebody's uncomfortable with something, they can throw up the X. If it's a scene that's a little more erotic, then you could fade to black. Things like that. The most important thing about playing a game and having fun is making sure that everyone is having fun, and we wouldn't want to make anybody uncomfortable. So you set expectations, you create a character, you talk about character outcome, and then you actually learn how to play the game. The end of session 0, I always say it's good to budget maybe an hour to run through the very, very, very prelude beginning of your story. So that way you can actually get used to rolling the dice and checking out your stat scores and what to add and modifiers and all that wonderful stuff. All of this comes together, right, to build a shared story. Because when you get to session 150 and you finally fight the big bad, you'll be happy that you had session 0 to talk about everything that came in between. Remember, session 0 is supposed to be the beginning of your campaign so that everybody involved has a good time. That's pretty much it. Thanks for watching.